What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Level 32 Studio. I'm Travis, your host, and today I just want to go over my new template, which I'm calling the Ableton Starter Template. And the reason I'm doing this is because a couple of months ago I had done a video on another template called the Ultimate Ableton Template, and I couldn't give that away because it used bits and pieces from some templates that I had purchased, and so I couldn't really resell that or give it away yet legally. So I built this from the ground up, and now I can give this away to anybody for free, and hopefully you all use it. So with that being said, let's jump on into it. When you first open it up, you're gonna see this notes section over here, or the text edit, whatever, on the right hand side, and this is going to tell you everything about the template, how everything is routed, what each channel and bus contains, what you could use each different section for, and then also it just describes the send effects down here. Way down here, all of these we'll get into all of that in a bit, but yeah, so let's flip it on over here to the other side. And the top track here, I've kept two things the same because I feel like anybody could do this themselves. This is a little something that I took from Projector. If you all watch him, I highly suggest it. Awesome guy, psytrance producer, DJ, engineer, all of that. Very smart too. Anyhow, I digress. So the length track is pretty self-explanatory. I will go over it here, and it even says right here, the length and arrangement layout. The colored section markers across the top show a suggested full song structure. Use these blocks as a guide for building intros, drops, breakdowns, transitions, etc. So the length track, you can just move this MIDI clip as to be as long or as short as you want, and then say you only want a 3.5 minute track, you just set it there, and instead of having this loop out a whole extra 3 minutes, you can just click this MIDI clip, Command L if you're on Mac, and it'll automatically set a loop like that. And if you want it that length, you can do it at that length, press Command L. The next set of tracks, which is in a group, is called the helpers. Again, I took this from Projector. It's very helpful and useful. Color coded so you can see your intro, a verse, a breakdown, your drops. You can see that I've got little spots in here for transitions, and you know, the lighter the color, probably the less amount of sounds you're going to probably have in the track going. And then the darker, the more driving the track is. And then right here where it's really dark, that's pretty much the apex of the track. And then you could probably bring it back down, and then you have your outro. The notes tracks here are literally just so you can leave some notes. So you can just find a section, highlight it, and if you just press Shift Command M, you'll create a MIDI clip. And then if you press Command R, again on Mac, that's what I'm using all the hotkeys for, then you can just type in anything that you want right here, and that can just help you remember what you need to do with your track. So instead of trying to put a whole bunch of different locators up here at the top and renaming them, because they'll get all bunched up when you're zoomed out, you'd have to zoom in so you could see them. So you could just have these 4 different note tracks with different notes, with all sorts of different notes in there. And say you have a few different things that you want to be switching up at the same time, you don't really have to see where it is, if that makes sense. You can just keep putting in your notes and know what you're putting in there. So I'm just going to delete these really quick if I actually press the right button. Alright, and then the master record, that just has the well, it should be set to resampling. And you can go ahead and set that to resample if you want. If not, you can just delete this track, and really this is to resample what you've done, or if you wanted to record your whole track into this so you could listen to it and tweak it further. Plenty of options with this master record track here. Do with it as you will. Alright, cool. So moving along, like I said, this template is aimed for the electronic musician. It's whether it's house, down tempo, conscious music healing, so on and so forth, whatever you do. We open up this group and we have a kick track, a drum track, and a percussion track. Now you can go ahead, these are all audio. If you use something like the Audija kick drum or some other VST drum plugin, you can just simply shift Command T and put in a default MIDI track there, and it will, you can just start drawing in your MIDI there. I just kept it on audio for simplicity's sake for everybody. And yeah, so all three of these tracks then get routed into this drum/percussion bus, which, really quick, all of these buses are being routed into this pre-master fader down here. We'll get to that in a bit. Also, each track has a new custom production channel strip. Pretty standard naming, you know, it's kind of been copied over, but I did go ahead and add in a couple extra little macros for everybody to use. You can push your gain up or down. You can adjust the width to be at mono. You can go up to 150%. If you wanted to make it wider, you can just click on map, and then you would open up this right here, and you would find the width, which is here, and you could push that up to 400% if you wanted to. I don't think we need to be pushing things to be at 400%, but yeah, then we've got a low cut, a high cut, and then we've got some controls for our compressor. I skipped the mono and the bass mono switches, so if we just look at the utility here, as soon as we get this to 1, it automatically puts it into mono. Same thing with the bass mono. As soon as we engage, tick it to 1, the bass mono comes on, and I have it set at 120 hertz because that was just what it was when you put the utility on here. You can go in, tweak this to your own settings. I did leave these little dips right here the same as what I had from the Ultimate template that I had shown, except for the one thing that I did is I just brought this scale down to 50% instead of 100%, because I just feel like it's just a lot. Those curves are a lot, so I just brought it down to 50%. You can tweak this as you want. Again, this production channel strip is on every single track, and I did go ahead and save it into my template, and anytime I create a new track, it's already on there. Anytime I create a new MIDI track, it's already on there. Just go ahead, if you want that to happen, just right click, come down here and just click save as default MIDI track. If you don't want that to happen, just delete it, and then again, right click, save as default MIDI track. Cool. On our bus groups, I've also put a production group bus channel strip as well. This one has a bit more controls for your EQ. And so you've got your high pass, you've got a low shelf. This is in the low, in the lows, sitting at, let's see, let's get over here to number 3. That is sitting at 60 hertz. So if you wanted to boost 60 hertz more, you could. If you wanted to cut it, you could. Again, come in here, move this to wherever you would like. I'm really trying to emphasize, set this to your own taste. The next one is going to be mud, which is right at, that's sitting right at the 300, but you know, mud is between 250 to 500, so I just split the difference. All right. The next one is going to be the presence, which, you know, that's where we hear things really well. So sometimes you don't want that to be boosting in your ears. Sometimes you might. It all just depends on the track that you're working on. I just have this set at negative 1.5 dB just to kind of smooth things out. And then we've got the clarity, which is right about 2000, 2500. Again, this will add clarity to your track. Then you've got a high shelf. You can boost and take that down if you want. And then a low pass. And then we have the makeup gain on the compressor and just the dry wet on that, because maybe you just want to do some parallel compression with it. And everything is set up to be running into this, hitting at negative 18 dB. If you need to adjust it for, you know, if you're a bass head that's making really loud music, you're going to want to adjust this to your taste. I have the attack slow, so it's not cutting off the transients. Quick release, ratio set at 4. Really nice. That's kind of just your standard, I guess, glue compression setting right there. All right. If you want to turn on the clipping, you can. In the type of music that I'm working with, conscious healing music, mostly ambient kind of stuff, we're not really wanting to clip stuff because it just adds unwanted distortion. But you could turn that on, turn that off if you will. We're going to quickly go over the next groups fairly quickly because they're all pretty much the same. We've got bass, synths, drones and pads, one-shots, atmospheres and effects sounds, and a vocal bus. So on our bass bus here, we've got that same production group channel strip, but I've also put in a compressor that is being sidechained from our kick track so we can get some sidechaining. And you can come in here and set this up as you need to. If everything is going in and, you know, hitting around that negative 18, if we set this at negative 21, we'd be getting 3 decibels of gain reduction, right? You know, and maybe you don't want that much, maybe you do, maybe you want more. I set my ratio at 4 because I'm not really trying to get that super pumpiness going on. Again, in some of the heavier tracks, dubstep, Sybiance, Psydub, Psytrance, you do want some of that pumping going on. So do adjust the ratio and the release to work in your favor. I do have it set on the peak mode as well, so it's actually reacting to the peak of the kick and not just the overall sound, which is what RMS is. And if we set it to expand, that would just make it louder and we wouldn't be getting the sidechain compression, right? And so those two things right there are on each bus, besides the drums and percussion, obviously, right? But if we open up our bass bus, you'll see that I have a default audio track and a default MIDI track. Same as from the Ultimate Template, just for whatever. If you just want to use bass audio, you just bring in your audio, drop it there. If you like to use Serum or Vital or Pigments or whatever you want right there, you can just drag and drop whatever VST you have on that. And again, all of these other buses are going to essentially be the exact same, having an audio and then a MIDI, except for the one-shots here, because most one-shots are just audio, right? So if you need to add in more, just click on it, press Command T a couple of times. That'll keep it in the group, and it'll keep the color code going, so you don't have to go in and right click it and be like, oh shit, which green was that? Maybe it was this one or this one, you know. I digress again. Atmos effects, again, just an audio, and vocals audio. I know I said these all had audio and MIDI, but the one-shots, atmospheres, and effects, those are all just audio. If you wanted to, you could put MIDI on any of these, especially in the Atmos/effects, because, you know, there's some pretty sweet effects and atmosphere sounds that come out of plugins. So do with that, yeah, you know what I'm saying. Do with that what you will. And then I just gave you all an extra default audio and MIDI track, again with the same production channel strip on there. If you don't want those there, just delete it. All of these, like I said, are all being, except for the helper and the length, because those don't have sound, they don't really need to be routed anywhere. But you could see that all of these tracks are being routed to the pre-master bus. I don't have these default tracks right here routed to it, because I would hope that you would put them into a group or bus that is appropriate for them to fit in. If you're making conscious healing music and you're using healing frequencies or something, I might suggest putting that in your one-shots possibly, or in your Atmos and effects, or even better yet, just create its own bus by itself. You know, you could just grab it, Command G, that'll group it up, and then you can just call it frequencies. Well, I personally like to call it healing frequencies, just for short, healing freak. So you could do something like that if you wanted. And then over here on the pre-master fader, again taking a couple of things from the Ultimate Template, we've got our production group bus, just like on all the other buses, but now we have a limiter set to true peak mode with a ceiling of -0.3. That way you're not going to blow your speakers or your cans or whatever. And we push up the gain 9 dB, and the release is set at 1,000 millisecond, or I'm sorry, 100 milliseconds. You can, again, please adjust this to your track so it's not like getting all distorted and crunchy or moving too slow or whatever. I've just kept that at the stock that it was. Obviously I would move it. I like to keep my look ahead at 1.5 personally, because the more look ahead that you give it, the more latency that you are introducing. Routing left, right, we don't really need to do mid-side. You can if you want, but I wouldn't suggest it with the Ableton limiter. Again, this is just a starter pack. This is just to help you get your ideas out, get going. I highly recommend swapping out stuff for, I guess, better, if you will. I know Ableton has, you know, revamped a lot of things, and all of their tools are very awesome, but their limiter, there's definitely better limiters out there. This will just help you get to a volume so you can hear it. If you want to turn on legacy smoothing, you can. That just means it's taking the smoothing algorithm from the old legacy limiter. I don't have that turned on. Nothing else really in here that you would, nothing else in there to adjust really. And then a reference track. This is probably one of the most crucial things that I do not ever hear of anybody using, is a reference track. And why do we want a reference track? Well, first and foremost, so you have a good direction. I mean, you might have an idea in your head, but you might not know how long your intro should be, or how long your break should be or how long anything should be. So this would be a good starting point. Also, it's a great helper to let you just hear where things sit in the mix. As far as, you know, the drums and the bass, you could hear how quiet they might be or how loud they might be. You could hear what different types of synths are being used and at what point they're being used, and just overall volume, if you will. I get sent a lot of tracks that the first thing I do when I listen to it, I will grab the Better Maker EQ, which is basically just a Pultec EQ, and I mean, 9 out of 10 times, the first thing that I'm going to boost is that low end, and then the high end, which, you know, we're giving a smiley face to it. But it's, if we can take care of that problem right here when we're producing, we'll be great. So that's why we have a reference track. All right, let's get down to the fun tracks, our send effects tracks. So the first one I am calling Tonal Memory. This is just a triplet delay. I did adjust the timing to be on the left to be a little sooner and the timing on the right to be a little bit later. I don't know what the exact timing is based off the percentage. If anybody wants to tell me in the comments down below, I would personally love that. The EQ or the filter shape is just set up in the mids, so we're not going to be repeating what's in the low end, and we're not going to be repeating that really high, loud harshness stuff. And then I just kept it set to the fade. That way it just fades out, right? And then quite a bit of feedback. I bumped mine up to 75%. You may want to take it back. Again, it's all just dependent on the track that you're working on. I'm going to bring this down. So a tone-locked multi-tap memory echo used for melodic echoes and rhythmic special patterns. The next effect we have here is an echo, calling it Temporal Bloom. It's a dual delay diffusion with sync locked movement. Again, the left side's on 1/8, the right side's on 1/16, and it's dotted. And I adjusted the timing as well. We have our feedback up to 75%. It's set to ping pong, 50% decay. Let's see, a little bit of modulation. I don't think real much is going on in there. If you want to adjust that, you can. I didn't turn on any of the character. If you want to turn that stuff on, you can. Maybe the ducking, that way when you're putting sounds into it, it gets out of the way of the sounds first, and then it brings in the echo. That's what that would be a good use for. Wobble, so you get some wobbly, wobbly, wobbly. Noise, obviously, is noise. And gate, that'll gate out the sound as well when it comes in. And moving right along, we have the gravity field, which is an expanded ambient reverb for send level use, deep atmospheric reverb with modulation and density shaping, used for massive spaces and sound healing ambiance. I'm going to change that sound healing to conscious healing, but I digress. Anyways, starting off from the left, I just cut out the lows at 333 hertz. If you see what I did there, pre-delay at 3 milliseconds, kind of sticking with some threes. Decay at 4.20, and then just a little bit of spin. You could turn that off if you want. I diffused the low end and a bit of the high end, that way it's not getting too sparse and sporadic. Just a little bit of chorus, barely moving, barely doing anything there. And again, mess around with this density setting here. Sparse is pretty good, mid's pretty good, high, they're all good in their own ways. Just test it out, see what you like. Again, and one thing, if you haven't noticed, all of the dry wets are all the way up to 100% wet because they're on a return track, and we don't really need the original sound so much as the affected sound. Right, so moving along, we've got a prism plate, and the reason I'm calling this a prism plate, I'll tell you in a second, but you could probably already see, it is a plate reverb with prism diffusion for, again, for blending. It's a plate IR blended with a prism algorithm, good for clean, shimmering tails. So yeah, we've got the A1 plate convolution first, right here, and then I'm using this prism algorithm here, and we are running them in parallel. If you wanted to, you could run them in serial, you could just use the algorithm, you could just use the convolution. I just wanted to hear both of them. A little bit of a pre-delay, that way it sounds more natural, that way that's the way, you know, the way that reverbs work. You know, we hear a clap and then we hear the echo, and it's a very short amount of time before that reverb kicks in. So anywhere between 10 to, you know, 35 milliseconds at max is, I guess, what we would call the most natural sounding. Moving to the EQ, we cut out a lot. We cut out the low end, we cut out some of the high end, just that way it's not building up and building up. Video coming up on that soon. I don't have the vintage on because I want this to be crisp and clean. Obviously, we're not putting bass through this, so we don't need to worry about monoing out the bass. Decay's set to 3.5 seconds, which is pretty decent. And if you look at the blend, we're pushing it more over towards the plate convolution side more than the prism. If you want to hear more of the prism, just push the blend more that way, or whichever one you want to hear. If you just want it right in the middle, just set it to 50-50. And that's about it. All the other settings are pretty much the same. I may have pushed the size up a bit on the algorithm side just to give it a bit more room and just let it play. Alright, and finally, the last effect in here. This is kind of a custom one. Well, it's not kind of, it is custom. I built this all on my own. With the help of ChatGPT, and as you can see, it's called Microcosm V3. I could get rid of the V3, but you know, I made a couple renditions of this, and this is the one that I settled on. And if you're not familiar with the Microcosm pedal, I would suggest go checking it out. But it is a fairly expensive pedal, so I tried to just replicate that here in the box. It starts off with a grain delay, and then it moves into an auto filter, and then a shifter, and then we have, let's undo that. Then we have an echo, and then a chorus, and then a hybrid reverb, and then just a utility. And I will go over this really quick to help you all. So the first control that we have here is the grain pitch, right? So obviously the pitch of the grains, I have it set an octave above. Then you have your grain amount time, grain spray, and that is all of that for the grain delay. If you wanted to, you can add more controls to it. You can adjust the random pitch and the feedback and the dry wet. I just felt that these were, I guess for me personally, the best settings, because the random pitch, it got a little too wild, and I didn't want it to be super random. I didn't want too much feedback because it just kept going and going, and yeah, that's just where I left it at. So I'm going to close that dude up. Moving on over, we've got an auto filter, and you can move the frequency of the auto filter, and that's really about all I have in there. I have the dry wet all the way up. I kind of just keep it right there in the middle, again cutting out the lows, cutting out the highs, so we're not getting buildup. I did add a little bit of drive to it on the SVF. I want to see what that stands for real quick. Let's see. SVF is a clean state variable filter. So again, trying to keep things clean and ambient and whatnot. That's kind of the name of the game. I didn't mess with too much other stuff up in there. So let's move along. Next we have a shifter. And here we can start to, shift the grains even more after they've been filtered. You can go up to 12 if you want to. Click on map and pop this open, and you can just where is that? That is going to be the pitch course. If you wanted to, you could put it up to 24, but I felt like 24 was too much, so I just left it at 12. And as far as everything else in here, I didn't really do too much. Obviously, I'd want to shift the pitch, not really the frequency. If you do want to, you can do that. It gets really crazy really fast on the frequency. I'm not a big fan of the ring portion of it, so I just keep it on the pitch. And yeah, that's about it for the shifter. Let's close this back up. Then we move over to another echo delay, and with this, really, I kept it on just quarter note synced left and right. Just seemed to be the best. I did boost the stereo up some, turn the output down, and because I put the stereo and the reverb all the way up on this, I brought the dry wet down to 50%. That way it's not smearing and taking over everything. And the control that we have here is just the feedback amount. We can go down to 30% and go all the way up to 85%. So all the way down, we're still getting a little bit of feedback. All the way up, we're getting a lot, but we're not going to keep cycling over and over. You might at 85%. So 50% for me is pretty cool. And then we have a chorus. And let's see. Nothing that the mod rate is... Oh, we should look and see where that mod rate is at. Uh-oh. And I forgot to say this. The mod rate is set up here in the modulation. If you wanted to give it more modulation, you can modulate your echo in here, right? Pretty cool. Sorry, I skipped over that one. Again, let's get back over to the chorus. Just kept it on the classic. If you wanted to do more of a high pass, you could push this up if you wanted. I just kept it at 50 hertz because I feel like we're doing a pretty good job beforehand of mitigating the low end and the muddiness, and hopefully you're doing that within your buses or your tracks before you're sending it over here. Pretty slow rate. Little bit of just a 30% amount. Width is at 100 and no feedback. Dry wets at 50% because choruses do become very audible, and I wasn't trying to get super audible with it. And finally, the last thing in this chain is going to be a hybrid reverb using the Cathedral Bouvet left right algorithm, I suppose. It's in the bigger spaces, and yeah, we're just cutting off some of that low end again. Blend is at 50-50. I'm using the shimmer algorithm in this one, and nothing's really changed. Again, we've got a pretty big stereo image here, so you may want to bring your dry wet down, but I kind of like it at 100% because it just takes everything that we've done beforehand, puts it into this reverb, and just makes it this huge, washed out, just amazing reverb. And you can just adjust the decay all the way up to 12 seconds, down to 3 seconds. I just have it set at 3.5 for now. And if it's getting too loud, you can just come over here, turn your gain up and down. Again, you could add more buttons or more macro knobs, and you could just map that yourself if you wanted to, like so. And that's that for that that chain. That was quite a chain right there. And then finally on the main channel, I don't have anything there because I'm doing my quote mastering, basic mastering, very basic mastering right here on the pre-master fader. And when I say very basic, that's because we're not really doing any sort of compression or saturation or anything. We're just boosting up a volume. So I left the main channel open so you could put something like adapter AB on there. Let me just find that real quick. I would like to use this personally on my track. I don't know how many people have this or don't, so I'm not including it, but this is a really great tool so you can just check out the overall dynamics and visual aspects of your track. You can see how loud it is, blah 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 blah. There's other tools that you can use, but that's where I would put all of that because your pre-master is being routed to the main track. And if you hadn't noticed as well, I did take all of these return tracks and put them into the pre-master fader track instead of the out track, which it normally does, because I want everything to be glued together. And this is just my own personal taste and preference. So if you want your reverbs and your delays to go straight to your main track, you can do that. But I advise that you might go over 0. You might start clipping things out, and it might not sound how you actually want it to sound. So yeah, with that, I'm going to leave a link for this down in the description for everybody to go and download this, do whatever you want to it. You have all the instructions over here. Everything tells you how to use everything, what things are for what. And yeah, I hope that you all have fun with this. And until the next one, peace.